They found the tent ripped open from the inside, but what they discovered in the snow miles away changed everything we know about human fear. It was January 1959. In the heart of the Soviet Union, the Cold War was raging outside, but inside the walls of the Ural Polytechnic Institute, a different kind of ambition was brewing. A group of 10 highly experienced, passionate, and physically elite hikers were preparing for an expedition that most ordinary people would consider suicide. They were going to conquer the frozen peaks of the northern Urals. Their leader was Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old engineering student who possessed a mind far beyond his years. He was meticulous, brave, and deeply respected by his peers. Alongside him were 8 other young students and 1 older guide. Veteran of World War II named Semyon Zolotaryov. They were all certified grade II hikers, meaning they had spent years surviving in the most brutal winter conditions nature could throw at them. This trip was meant to be their final test to earn the coveted grade III certification, the highest rank achievable in the Soviet Union. The destination was Mount Untouchable. To the average Russian citizen, it was just a point on a map, but to the local indigenous Mansi people, the mountain held a dark ancestral reputation. In their native tongue, Untouchable did not mean beauty or majesty. It translated directly to a stark warning. Don't go there, the hikers knew about the legends. They knew the stories of strange winds, mysterious disappearances, and the sacred nature of the peaks. But they were products of the Soviet scientific age. They did not believe in ghosts, gods, or curses. They believed in heavy coats, sturdy boots, reliable maps, and human endurance. Before leaving, one of the hikers, Yuri Yudin, fell ill with severe joint pain. He was forced to turn back, leaving the group at the final outpost of civilization. As he hugged his friends goodbye, tears came to his eyes. He did not know that this painful illness was the only reason he would survive. He did not know that he was kissing his friends goodbye for the last time. The remaining 9 hikers marched forward into the blinding white wilderness. They carried heavy wooden skis, thick canvas tents, a handmade stove designed by Igor himself, and multiple cameras to document their historic journey. For the first few days, everything went perfectly. Their diaries, later recovered by investigators, were filled with laughter, songs, and typical college drama. They wrote about the breathtaking beauty of the snow, the warmth of their campfire, and their absolute confidence in reaching the summit. But on February 1st, the weather broke. A sudden violent blizzard swept across the mountain range, dropping the visibility to 0 and plunging the temperature to -30 degrees. The wind howled like a dying animal, tearing at their heavy clothing. Lost in the whiteout, the group drifted off course. Instead of making it to the sheltered forest below Mount Untouchable, they found themselves climbing the barren, exposed slopes of a neighboring peak. A peak the Mansi called Kalet Siekle. The Mountain of the Dead. By 5:00 p.m. on February 1st, the darkness had completely swallowed the mountain. The storm was relentless. Igor Dyatlov faced a critical choice. He could lead his team down the steep slope into the relative safety of the forest line, which was about a mile away. Or they could pitch their tent right there on the exposed, freezing ridge of Dead Mountain. Igor chose the ridge. Investigators later puzzled over this decision. Why would an expert hiker camp in the most dangerous, windy, and unprotected spot on the entire mountain? Some believe he simply didn't want to lose the altitude they had worked so hard to gain. Others believe the storm was so blindingly violent that they couldn't see where the forest even began. They dug a shallow trench into the snow to shield the tent from the screaming winds. They pitched their heavy canvas shelter, secured it with skis and poles, and crawled inside. It was a tight, cramped space for 9 adults, but it was warm. They changed out of their wet boots, laid out their blankets, and prepared a cold dinner of bread and bacon. The handmade stove remained unlit, likely because the tent was already warm enough from there. Collective body heat, or because the wind outside was too dangerous to risk lighting a fire. They expected to return to their base camp by February 12th. Igor had promised to send a telegraph to their university sports club the moment they made it back to safety. February 12th arrived. The telegraph station remained silent. At first, the university and the families did not panic. In the brutal winters of Siberia, a delay of a few days was completely normal. Storms could trap a team in one place for 48 hours without warning. But as the days bled into one another, and February 20th arrived with still no word from the Dyatlov group, the silence transformed into pure, unadulterated terror. The parents of the students began protesting outside government offices, demanding a rescue. Operation: the university quickly assembled a volunteer search party consisting of fellow students and teachers who knew the hikers personally. When they found nothing, the Soviet military stepped in. Helicopters, airplanes, heavy trucks, and trained search dogs were deployed into the frozen wilderness. On February 26th, a student volunteer named Mikhail Sharavin spotted something dark sticking out of the snow on the slopes of Kalet Siekal. He moved his skis closer through the deep drifts. It was the tent, but as he approached, his heart sank into his chest. The scene made absolutely no sense. The tent was half buried in the snow, silent, cold, and eerie. The main entrance was still tied shut. But the side of the thick canvas had been violently ripped open when Sharavin drew his knife and cut the rest of the fabric to look inside. What he saw made the hair on his neck stand up. The hikers' belongings were perfectly preserved. Their heavy winter boots were lined up in the corner. Their fur coats, their trousers, their money, their diaries, and their food were all sitting exactly where they had left them. A flash lamp rested on top of the tent, frozen solid but still. Switched to the on position. The hikers had fled into a -30-degree Siberian blizzard without their clothes, without their shoes, and without their survival gear. They were barefoot, wearing nothing but thin socks and light underwear. What could possibly scare 9 professional survivalists so deeply that running out into a lethal, freezing storm naked felt like their only option? The search party stood around the ruined tent in absolute disbelief. The wind was howling over the ridge, a stark reminder of how deadly the environment was. Experienced military officers looked at the footprints left in the snow, preserved by a rare freezing phenomenon that turned the pressed snow into hard ice structures. There were 8 or 9 distinct sets of tracks. Some of them were made by people wearing only socks. One track showed a person wearing a single boot while the other foot was bare. Others were completely barefoot, their toes clearly visible in the frozen mold. The tracks did not indicate chaotic panic. They were not scattered in all directions. Instead, the footprints showed that the group had formed a neat, orderly line and walked down the mountain together at a normal pace. They weren't running frantically, they were walking with purpose. They moved down the steep slope toward the dark, imposing tree line of the forest a mile away. As the searchers followed the tracks down the slope, the psychological weight of the mystery grew heavier. Why would a group of rational, highly educated adults calmly walk to their deaths? If they were fleeing an immediate threat inside the tent, like a fire or a gas leak, they would have stopped a few yards away once they were safe. They would have realized they were freezing, and they would have gone back for their boots and coats, but they didn't look back. They kept walking deeper and deeper into the freezing darkness of the night. At the edge of the forest, nearly a mile from the tent, stood a massive ancient cedar tree. It was here, beneath the frozen branches, that the search party discovered the first physical evidence of the tragedy. 2 bodies lay side by side under a thin blanket of snow. They were Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko. Both men were stripped down to their shirts and undergarments. Their feet were bare, blackened by frostbite. Next to them were the remains of a small, pathetic campfire that had burned out hours ago. They had tried to burn thick, wet pine branches, which would have produced more smoke than actual heat, but it was their hands that caused the searchers to gasp. The skin on their palms and fingers was torn to shreds, raw and bleeding before they froze. The lower branches of the massive cedar tree were snapped off. Higher up, at a distance of nearly 15 feet, thicker branches were broken. The medical examiners realized a horrifying truth. These 2 young men had frantically attempted to climb the frozen tree with their bare hands. They had pulled themselves up, stripping the skin from their fingers, until the branches broke under their weight and they fell back into the snow. What were they looking for from the top of that tree? Were they trying to see if the tent was safe? Or were they desperately trying to climb away from something that was hunting them on the ground? The discovery under the cedar tree sent a wave of horror through the rescue camp. The search dogs were brought in, sniffing through the deep snowdrifts between the tree and the abandoned tent. It didn't take long for them to find more victims. Scattered in a relatively straight line between the forest edge and the ridge were 3 more bodies. They were Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, and Rustam Slobodin. Unlike the 2 Yuris under the cedar tree, these 3 were positioned facing the tent. Their frozen arms were outstretched, their fingers gripping the hard crust of the snow. Igor Dyatlov was found on his back, one hand clutching a small branch, his eyes wide open, staring blankly up into the gray winter sky. Zinaida was found closer to the tent, buried face down in a drift. It was clear to the investigators what had happened to them. After leaving the tent and realizing the mortal danger they were in at the forest edge, these three had gathered there. Remaining strength and attempted to crawl back up the mountain to reclaim their clothes and shelter. The distance was immense. Walking up a steep mountain slope in a 30-degree below blizzard without shoes or coats is an impossible task for the human body. One by one, their core temperatures dropped. Their muscles locked up, their vision blurred, they collapsed into the snow, their hearts slowing to a final, permanent stop, just hundreds of yards short of survival. Rustam Slobodin's body revealed another troubling detail. When the medical examiners inspected his frozen corpse, they found a small fracture in his skull, about 6 inches long. However, the doctor noted that this head injury was not fatal. Rustam had not died from the blow to his head, he had died of hypothermia. Freezing to death while unconscious in the snow, 5 dead, 5 young, brilliant lives snuffed out on the slopes of Dead Mountain, but the mystery was far from complete. There were still 4 hikers missing. Semyon Zolotaryov, Alexander Kolvatov, Nikolai Thiboksbrignoles, and Ludmila Dubinina were nowhere to be found. The search party dug through the snow around the cedar tree for days. Driving long iron probes into the drifts, they found nothing. The winter storms returned, covering Khalat Siekle in fresh sheets of white ice. The search had to be paused. It would take 2 long, agonizing months for the spring sun to melt the thick mountain ice and reveal the final, most terrifying chapter of the Dyatlov Pass incident. On May 4, 1959, as the snow finally began to recede into small mountain streams, a searcher noticed a chaotic pile of pine branches buried deep inside a ravine. About 75 yards away from the cedar tree, they began to dig frantically through 12 feet of compacted ice. At the bottom of the dark, wet ravine, they found the remaining 4 hikers. They were huddled together in a desperate, frozen embrace. But as the soldiers pulled the bodies out of the muddy snow, the nature of the entire investigation changed instantly. This was no longer a simple, tragic story of hypothermia and bad weather. This was a crime scene of unimaginable violence. The first 5 bodies found on the mountain slope had died of the cold. Their skin was intact, their bones unbroken, but the 4 bodies in the ravine had suffered injuries that defied all medical logic. Nikolai Thiboksbrignoles had his skull completely shattered. The bones were smashed inward, causing massive internal trauma. Semyon Zolotaryov, the veteran, had his entire right ribcage crushed. His ribs were broken into multiple pieces, puncturing his internal organs. Ludmila Dubinina, the 20-year-old female student, had suffered an even worse fate. Her chest was completely caved in, her ribs shattered on both sides of her body. The lead medical examiner, Dr. Boris Vozrojdeny, was stunned by the autopsies. He stated in his official report that the immense force required to cause such devastating internal injuries was equal to a high-speed car crash, or the shockwave of a massive explosion. But here was the catch that terrified the investigators. There were absolutely no external bruises or soft tissue damage on their skin. How do you crush a human being's chest cavity, shattering their thickest bones into splinters, without leaving a single black and blue mark, a single scratch, or a single tear on the outer skin? It was as if their bodies had been compressed by an invisible, immense wave of unnatural pressure. And then, the most chilling, gruesome detail of all emerged from the muddy waters of the ravine. Ludmila Dubinina was found missing her tongue. It had been ripped out from the very root of her throat. Her eyes were gone, leaving empty, dark sockets staring into the mud. Parts of her facial tissue and her upper lip were completely torn away. Semyon Zolotaryov was also missing his eyeballs. The rescue camp fell into a state of paranoid panic. Rumors spread like wildfire among the student volunteers and soldiers. Were they attacked by the local Mansi tribesmen for stepping on sacred ground? Were they hunted by an unknown wild beast? Or was there something far more sinister happening in the skies above Siberia? As the horrific details of the autopsies reached the high-ranking officials in Moscow, the entire investigation was suddenly hijacked by the Soviet state apparatus. The KGB, the notorious secret police, descended upon the small town of Ivdel. They took control of all the files, confiscated the diaries, and grabbed every roll of film found in the hikers' cameras. The student volunteers were ordered to pack their bags and go home. They were forced to sign strict non-disclosure agreements, swearing under penalty of treason that they would never speak about what they saw on Dead Mountain. By May 28, 1959, just a few weeks after the final bodies were pulled from the ravine, the official Soviet investigation was abruptly closed. The conclusion was written in a vague, cryptic language. That offered no closure to the grieving families. The document stated that the 9 hikers had died due to an unknown compelling force, which they were unable to overcome. The case was classified as top secret and locked away in a dark government archive, hidden from the public eye for over 30 years. Why would a government close a case involving the violent, mutilated deaths of 9 elite citizens so quickly? Why the extreme secrecy? If it was a simple natural disaster like an avalanche or a sudden storm, there would be no need for the KGB to threaten witnesses. The secrecy itself became the biggest clue that the Soviet government knew exactly what had killed the Dyatlov group, and they were absolutely terrified of the world finding out. When the Soviet Union finally collapsed in the early 1990s, portions of the classified Dyatlov files were leaked to journalists and researchers. What lay inside those dusty pages did not solve the mystery. It made it infinitely more terrifying. The first piece of hidden evidence concerned the clothing of the victims. Forensic technicians had tested the sweaters and trousers worn by the hikers. Found in the ravine, to their utter astonishment, the fabric was highly radioactive. The levels of radiation were multiple times higher than normal background safety limits. Where did the radiation come from? These were college students on a wilderness holiday. They weren't working in a nuclear reactor. They were in the middle of an unmapped mountain range thousands of miles away from industrial centers, yet their clothes carried the invisible signature of a nuclear event. The second piece of evidence came from the sky. On the very night of February 1st, 1959, the exact night the hikers fled their tent, another group of independent campers located several miles south of Khalet-Siekel witnessed something extraordinary. They looked up into the freezing night sky and saw strange, glowing orange spheres floating silently over Dead Mountain. These orange orbs changed direction, hovered in place, and then vanished behind the peaks. Similar sightings were reported by local meteorological stations and even Soviet military personnel in the region throughout the months of February and March. The puzzle pieces began to come together, pointing toward a dark military conspiracy. During the late 1950s, the Soviet Union was deep in the arms race against the United States. They were desperately testing new intercontinental ballistic missiles, secret radar systems, and experimental weapons in the remote regions of the Ural Mountains. Did Igor Dyatlov and his team unknowingly pitch their tent in the middle of a top-secret military testing zone? Did a stray missile detonate in the air above their camp, releasing a wave of radioactive fallout and a supersonic pressure wave that crushed the bones of the hikers in the ravine? If a vacuum bomb or a fuel air explosive was tested nearby, it would explain the shattered ribs without external bruises. As the extreme change in atmospheric pressure literally causes the air inside the lungs to expand violently, fracturing the chest from within, it would also explain why the hikers fled in such a desperate hurry. They weren't running from a ghost. They were running from a toxic, suffocating chemical cloud. As researchers dug deeper into the leaked files, they discovered that one of the hikers' cameras contained a final, highly controversial frame. Frame number 34 on Igor Dyatlov's camera was a blurry, chaotic image. Taken in absolute darkness, it did not show a smiling student or a beautiful mountain sunset. It showed a strange, glowing streak of light against a pitch-black background. Some experts believe it was a mistake, an accidental click of the shutter while packing. But others believe it was the final thing the hikers saw before they died, an approaching weapon, a burning piece of military technology, falling from the heavens directly toward their tent. And then there was the mystery of Semyon Zolotaryov. Semyon was much older than the other students. He was a 37-year-old World War II veteran with a mysterious past. He had multiple secret tattoos on his body, including strange geometric patterns and letters that no one could decipher. He had suddenly joined the Dyatlov group at the very last minute, replacing another student. Before leaving on the trip, Semyon told his mother something highly unusual. He said, "I am going on a journey, and when I return, the whole world will talk about me." Did Semyon know something about the mountain? Was he an undercover KGB agent sent to monitor the area, or perhaps a spy attempting to document secret military facilities? When his body was minute, replacing another student. Before leaving on the trip, Semyon told his mother something highly unusual. He said, "I am going on a journey, and when I return, the whole world will talk about me." Did Semyon know something about the mountain? Was he an undercover KGB agent sent to monitor the area, or perhaps a spy attempting to document secret military facilities? When his body was Exhumed for modern DNA testing decades later, the results shocked scientists. The DNA of the body buried in Semyon's grave did not match his living relatives. The man who died on Dead Mountain might not have been Semyon Zolotaryov at all. In 2020, under immense pressure from the public and the global media, the Russian government reopened the Dyatlov Pass case for a final, definitive review. They sent a team of modern scientists, avalanche experts, and high-tech equipment back to the slopes of Khalat Syekhl. In early 2021, they released their official conclusion to the world. They claimed the mystery was solved. According to the new report, the hikers were victims of a rare, specific natural disaster known as a delayed slab avalanche. The scientists explained that when the hikers cut a trench into the snow slope to pitch their tent, they accidentally weakened the base of the snowpack above them. Hours later, as they slept, a heavy, solid slab of compacted snow and ice broke free from the ridge. It slid down silently and crashed into the tent, crushing the hikers underneath its immense weight. This theory neatly explains the catastrophic internal injuries. The heavy weight of the ice slab could easily fracture skulls and shatter ribcage while they lay flat on their backs. The panic caused by being buried alive would explain why they frantically sliced open the tent from the inside to escape suffocating. They ran down the mountain in their underwear because they were terrified of a second, larger avalanche wiping out the entire slope. Once they reached the safety of the forest, hypothermia took over, and the brutal cold finished what the snow had started. The missing eyes and tongue were simply the work of small wild animals and birds scavenging the bodies in the spring. It sounds perfect. It sounds logical. It satisfies the modern scientific mind. But for the families of the victims, and for the thousands of investigators who have dedicated their lives to this case, the official story feels like just another layer of ice covering up a dark truth. If it was a simple avalanche, why did 9 elite, highly trained survivalists abandon all logic? An avalanche slab small enough to hit only a portion of the tent would not prevent them from digging out their boots and heavy coats before walking into a deadly blizzard. They knew the rules. Of the mountains, without gear, you are a dead man walking. An avalanche does not explain why their clothing was highly radioactive. An avalanche does not explain the glowing orange spheres witnessed by dozens of people across the region on that exact night. An avalanche does not explain why the KGB swooped in within hours, classified the files as top secret, and forced every teenage volunteer to sign a lifetime oath of silence. And it certainly does not explain why the body buried in Semyon Zolotaryov's grave carries the DNA of a complete stranger. The true history of that night remains locked away in the cold, unyielding earth of Siberia. The 9 hikers left behind a legacy of brilliant youth, beautiful dreams, and an unfinished journey. They were young people full of life, loves, and laughter who went into the mountains looking for an adventure, only to find an unnameable horror. In their final diary entries, written just hours before the end, they spoke of how beautiful the snow looked under the moonlight. They were happy, they were warm, they were together. Instead, their final moments on this earth were filled with an unimaginable, screaming terror in the pitch black of a Russian winter. They died alone, fighting an invisible enemy, their frozen hands reaching out for a safety that would never come. We may now have the computer models to explain the snow, and we may have the reports to explain the weather. But we will never truly know what those 9 brave souls witnessed in their final, desperate hours. Were they running from the wrath of nature, or were they running from the dark secrets of a desperate government? Some secrets are meant to stay buried in the ice forever.